DPS principals accused of taking bribes, the future of legal pot in Michigan, and politics not as usual this election. Stay put. MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. We have a lot going on this week, but the biggest headline that just smacked you in the face: corruption in Detroit public schools. Principals accused of taking bribes. It is a story that is making national news. 12 former and current principals, one administrator, and one vendor accused of a $1 million kickback scheme where the principals used this vendor for school supplies and allegedly got paid. The supplies, according to the U.S. Attorney, were rarely delivered. The U.S. Attorney said public corruption never comes at a good time and has nothing to do with the current bailout of the school system. But this investigation, no doubt, will affect how lawmakers and parents see DPS at a time where the schools are in a financial crisis and kids are leaving the district. We are going to start there tonight with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Guys, when I heard this news, I just felt sick. I felt sick to my stomach.
Well, that's the first time you've heard it.
No, it's not the first time you've heard it, but I don't know. But when you say a roundup of 12 principals, former and current, I mean, you're not talking about one person.
No, and it is. But still, I mean, how long ago did you cover Detroit public
20
schools?
years ago, and most of my stories were about stuff like this.
Yeah, these same sort of kickback schemes. This is where a good chunk of the $2 billion in bond money that was supposed to fix these schools went over the last 20 years. But the timing could not be worse as the legislature considers this debt payoff package and restructuring of the schools. You know, the question up there has been how much oversight do we put on this money? And the city, the schools have resisted a good deal of oversight from the state, and rightfully so. The state's been a mess the last 5 or 6 years as well. But I think this complicates the whole task of getting this debt repayment passed.
All right, before we even get to Lansing and what they think about this, and it is another, not excuse, but another mark in the column of, well, I'm not quite sure if I want to help out DPS. I mean, how did we even get there in the first place that we have these principals who are doing this? Well, allegedly.
And again, if I go back to 22 years ago when I was covering the district, this was the kind of activity that was not just sort of one or two principals, but I mean it's just sort of part of the system, and it's the way things got done. You know, I could go back and pull clips with my name on them that detail stories that are very similar to what we saw this week, and we just have not been able in the city to get past that kind of pay-to-play control and dynamic in government. And it's not just schools. I mean, you look around, there are lots of places that takes place. I mean, I've always had a hard time understanding why someone would do this in a school. I mean, I think that there ought to be a moral sort of barrier there for people to say, look, I'm in charge of education in these kids. I'm not going to do this. But I also think that a lot of these people would tell you this is how stuff gets done in the district. And as individuals, they don't feel like they can push back.
Well, I mean, the culture like this grows up because people think they can get away with it. And why they think they can get away with it has always been curious to me, because over the years, we've seen indictment after indictment after indictment, and people still try this same scheme. You know, the vendors, the contractors, they're greasing palms, and it starts out small. And you know, when they rounded up those folks at the EAA just a few months ago for this very same thing, the one woman said, well, you know, everybody does this. This is how I grew up. In
So
the
I
district.
learned
Right.
it from the other
Right, from the other
and I thought
principals,
that
this
was
is how
very
they told me how to do it. Now, I thought it was interesting, there was a quote, I believe, and it was the Free Press, from a teacher reacting to this, and she said, quote, "It's pitiful that they're going after principals who are probably just doing what they need to do, even if it might be a little bit unethical, in order to provide the students in their schools with the supplies and the materials
Well, I
that
mean-
they need, the district and the state should be providing us." So, but how do you then get over that mindset of, well, it's, you know, it's not right, it's unethical, but they're just doing what they need
Again,
to
I mean,
do.
this is a system where people are accustomed to dealing with incredibly trying and difficult conditions over a long period of time, where there is never enough to do the job you're supposed to do. I mean, there's not enough money in the schools to provide the things that the kids need. And then I think you get people who are just sort of susceptible to the idea that, okay, well, this is the way, again, this is the way things
you
work.
can't
And this is
assign-
the way to make things work. And so I'm just going to go along with it.
There's no noble characteristics here. I mean, in one case, they were $5 million, $2 million ended up in the pockets of these folks. You can't say, well, gosh, they were just looking out for the kids. They were looking out for themselves.
Yeah, when they're
That's
saying that
took
some of the
half
supplies
money
weren't even
that was supposed to
delivered.
go for the supplies. It wasn't people cutting corners or doing sort of shady things to get kids supplies. They were putting the money in their own pocket.
pockets, sure.
All right, so let me go back to the bottom line question of how do you change this culture then? How do you, in this renewed era of, okay, there's going to be a new DPS, there's going to be a new way of doing things, how does this change?
I don't know.
I don't think it does. I mean, this is the culture of a district. It's a very large district. You could change the person at the top. It's like any other huge organization. Changing a culture is extremely hard, whether it's an auto company or a governmental unit. And I think you change it by calling people to account, by putting people in jail and making the cost of taking these bribes and kickbacks too high to risk.
So then let's then take the pathway up to Lansing. So now if you've got lawmakers who are looking at this, and Nolan brought up the point originally when he first started talking, how does this play now in the legislature?
Well, it provides a really convenient excuse for people who didn't want to do the right thing anyway to now hang that on something that people in Detroit did, as opposed to the fact that the state is responsible for the debt that they're trying to forgive right now. I mean, everyone's got to sort of keep their eye on the ball. If you don't do this, if you don't take care of this debt, it doesn't come to the people in the city of Detroit. It belongs to the state, and you'll pay more later if you don't do it now. And so, I mean, I think the governor and the leaders in the legislature have got to make that clear. There is not a choice here, and what is going on with this scandal is actually not related to what they're debating. Now, what the system looks like going forward and what kind of controls you want to put in, those are legitimate debates they were going to have anyway. But this does not change, it doesn't change the facts on the ground in terms of what needs to be done.
It doesn't change what needs to be done, but it certainly makes a strong case that the folks in the House had been making, that this money's got to come with more oversight. There's got to be more controls put on this money. You're not going to get the votes to send that kind of money into Detroit without oversight, particularly in light of this scandal, because you're going to have taxpayers up there saying, well, gosh, we're sending all this money up there, and they're going to stuff it in their pockets.
Well,
I think they've earned that themselves.
Financial oversight's one thing. They are venturing into other things, though. They want to tell the district how to manage union negotiations, for instance. That doesn't have anything to do with this, and that's not the state's business, quite frankly. I mean, there's an overreach, of course, because it's politics that's sort of afoot here, and this could be used as predicate for it, but it's not legitimate.
It's a state business in the sense that if the district ends up in the same sort of financial trouble again, is the state going to write another check to wipe out the debt? I think financial oversight in all areas is appropriate until this district gets the sort of leadership in place that can run it in a professional, competent, efficient way.
And
that's defied.
And you guys say,
That's
well, you know
defied
what,
the
how do you
district
even
for
change the
decades.
culture of this too? My question is now, are we going to be seeing more charges? Are we going to be seeing more principals or more
I think that's a question for Barbara McQuaid. You know, does she think that this was a discrete number of people involved in a very specific scheme, or is it the tip of the iceberg and indicative of a much wider pattern of practice. I don't know that I haven't heard her address that, and she probably wouldn't tip her hand
Doesn't
anyway.
know yet.
But I mean, if you look at the pattern of her office, I mean, she has not gone after small kinds of stuff in this regard. It's usually pretty big. So.
All right. Well, let's mellow out now with some marijuana news and the future of pot in Michigan. A new Epic MRA poll out this week showed that 53% of Michiganders would support legalizing and taxing marijuana. And compared to polls in the last few years, the number supporting it continues to grow. So will Michigan be among a list of states with the pot question on the ballot this November? We've talked about this a little bit, that this could be the year for the pot legalization question in Michigan. Nolan, what's your feeling in terms of, I mean, they're collecting signatures right now and they're getting close to what they need.
They are, and I would think that poll suggests bad news for the proposal. If it's just 53% at the start, typically a proposal to change a law, you need at least 65% at the start, because remember, no spending has been done against it yet. I'm not sure that's a very strong support number to get a ballot measure passed.
People who support it say, well, sometimes when people are asked the pot question on a poll, that they sometimes maybe don't tell the truth, that there's maybe more support out there than they think.
I could see it passing. I don't think that's much of the question. I was surprised by that number. I think it is actually higher. My concern is still that there's not enough regulatory scheme in place to deal with it. I mean, if we want to legalize marijuana, we need to start dealing with when can you use it, when can you not? Can you do it and drive? If not, then how do you test for that, for instance? Those are things that I think I would rather see us do up front than on the back end. It probably won't work that way if they get this on the ballot, because again, I think it would pass.
Do you think this would be a good thing for Michigan, though? I mean, you take a look at what they could tax from this, and then, they put the taxes towards education, you put it towards government services, towards infrastructure repair.
Everything rests with the implementing language. It depends how the law is written once it comes to the legislature, because a ballot proposal just starts the process.
Yeah.
And so if they try to come up with a regimen that is half legal, half illegal, in other words, they don't allow for the legal production and the legal distribution. If it's simply, okay, you can use marijuana, it will no longer be criminal, I think it doesn't do what it needs to do. I think you have to legalize the process from start to finish.
Well, you would also have to take a look at what Colorado has done in the last couple of years. And I think that they're pretty much split in Colorado, about a little bit more majority saying this has been a successful venture for them. But they are still having some policing problems and figuring out how you do test for what you're talking about.
Right.
High while driving, and those sort of
other
things.
stuff.
That's a simple solution. You don't prosecute or you don't write tickets for what somebody did. You write tickets for how they're driving. If they're driving erratically, then you write a ticket for that. I don't know that testing what's in their system is as important as how they're driving.
Well, I mean, there's a difference between reckless driving and impaired driving is the point. I mean, the law makes that distinction.
Well, if you're impaired, you're going to be driving erratically and recklessly.
Well, but even if you're not,
I think
there's
that's
a
the
law
problem
against being impaired.
I think that's the problem with trying to set arbitrary blood level
you
numbers
just want,
and what have you.
you just want the drunk driving limits lowered.
I think .08 is different for different people. You prosecute, you enforce the law on how somebody's driving, not what's in their system.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with that. I mean, I think there should be legal limits for impairment, and whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever.
Although you would acknowledge that people are impaired at different levels, correct? Some lower, some higher.
No,
You've got to judge the actual act, the actual behavior, not what somebody did before.
But I mean, sort of back to the marijuana question.
Well, it's the same question.
There's no test for that, right?
It doesn't matter. There's a test for whether you're driving well or not.
Yeah, no, I think there's.
I mean, if you're driving dangerously,
so part of
that's what you should be prosecuted for.
Yeah, but part of the law, part of the thinking behind the law is prophylactic. It's not to deal with writing tickets. It's to prevent people from doing it in the first place. So that's why we set limits and say, if you're over this limit, don't get behind the wheel. And whether you are stopped by police or not, you are breaking the law.
And I think those kind of laws don't work very well, and you're never going to get by this legalization question unless you get over this obsession with.
I think if you look at the number of drunk driving fatalities before we lowered the limit and after, I think you would not be able to support what you're saying
change.
there.
Something else that is different, and I'm doing some research and taking a look at what Colorado has done as well, is that it's also a very large cash business as well, because they can't do a lot of banking because of the federal regulations about marijuana use and sales, because federally, I mean, that is still an illegal substance, but because the Supreme Court is not going to be taking up that issue, and they just pushed that back down about a week ago or so. It's still a very interesting thing. Now, we're not the only ones who are flirting with this. Arizona is, Massachusetts
I mean, you've got states now moving in the direction of legalization, and that, I think, puts more pressure on the federal government to rethink its classification of the drug. Should it be something that you can never use or never sell? Or should it be something like alcohol or other kinds of substances?
There's got to be some deference to state laws. We've got people in Michigan who are in jail today who were in complete compliance with state laws and thought what they were doing was legal, and it was under state law. And the feds have busted them and put them in jail. I mean, that's not right. You've got to reconcile the state and federal laws.
I mean, there are lots of things that are different between states and federal law. Here you have a direct conflict, and that's sort of unusual. But I mean, the way it usually happens is that a number of states will move in a direction that contradicts federal law, and then the federal law gets reconsidered. I don't know that we're quite there yet. You only have a couple of states that have actually legalized marijuana, but I think that the discussion about it is happening at such a pace that the federal government would be smart to start thinking about, well, you know, what would this look like if you had 50 states, for instance, or even 35 who had legal marijuana? That conflict with the federal law would raise much bigger issues.
All right, so what do we think about the future of pot here in Michigan?
Well, I think it's going to happen. The sooner the better. I think you could put the Mexican drug cartels out of business almost overnight if all 50 states legalized the production, distribution, and use of marijuana. I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, I've always said when my kids were teenagers, I would rather have them smoking marijuana than drinking alcohol.
Really?
Because
why?
it's the level of impairment is so much. I mean, over drinking alcohol will kill you or can kill you.
Sure.
And I don't know that we've had anyone.
The public health issues with alcohol are different than they are with marijuana, but the sort of, again,
I would say it's a worse drug than marijuana, and that's legal and marijuana is.
Yeah, I think behind the wheel is my concern. Behind the wheel, behind the controls of heavy construction equipment. Well, it's against the law to do those things with alcohol, and you can test for that. You can't do that yet for marijuana.
All right. We'll have to leave the pot question aside for now.
I don't know. I mean, one thing I'm not sure is whether they're going to get their act together with these ballot proposals. There are two competing interests. They're trying to get the thing on the ballot.
Who will oppose? I mean, where
I don't know.
the opposition money? I think that's the key question, where the opposition money comes from and how much of it. Because again, 53% is not a great starting point for a ballot measure.
It's not. That's true. I'm not sure I believe that number, but you're right.
I was just going to say, there's not 15% more sitting somewhere in a corner.
I think there might. Eating Doritos.
With a couple of eating Triscuits.
Medical marijuana passed here by a fairly substantial margin.
It did.
There's no reason to think that this won't. But.
All right. Well, you know, I've been pretty busy watching the race for the president. There are some interesting local races shaping up. In Oakland County, Executive L. Brooks Patterson is being challenged by Democrat and ex-state rep Vicki Barnett. And recently, outgoing Congresswoman Candace Miller says she's running for Macomb County Public Works Commissioner. All right, so I want to take a look at these two things, which are pretty interesting. Let's first talk about, Noel, let me start with you. The challenge to Brooks Patterson in Oakland County. Is this a true challenge from Vicki Barnett?
Well, it'll be a true challenge, and the county's demographics have changed significantly. Democrats have picked up a couple of other key countywide seats. I don't think anybody's going to beat Brooks Patterson. I think probably Vicki Barnett for sure is not going to beat Brooks Patterson. I think, he's got one more term left in him. He's going to run and win. I think the more interesting development was what happened in Macomb County. I had thought Candace Miller was running for governor, and then boom, here she is running for water commissioner, or public works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This technically doesn't prevent her from running for governor. I mean,
Right, I mean,
this
she could
election
take the
is this
seat in
year.
2016.
I think it doesn't technically prevent her, but I think practically
Yeah.
and politically, this is what she's running for.
You know, I asked her in Washington last time I was there about governor, and she said that what she wanted to do, I mean, she was eager to get back home to Michigan, but that if she was going to do something else in politics, it was going to be something where she could actually do something, where she could actually have her hands on.
Wow, you know what? That's a statement.
Well, it is.
That is a pretty big
and this
statement.
this is a much more hands-on kind of job than governor, frankly. I mean, governor is an administrative job and a political job. This is all about service and service delivery, and maybe that's more
There's
interesting.
a whole lot of Macomb County politics going on here. Morocco has been
Sure.
sort of, he and Hackle have been feuding, and there's a real divide in the county. Hackle, a Democrat, has said he's going to support her.
Yeah,
I
Candace
think
Miller.
she was stepping out of his way. I'd still expect him now to run for governor, and he said from the beginning he wouldn't run against Candace,
You know, I think
nor
it-
she him.
I think it's an interesting, bigger question, what you just brought up, that Candace Miller, who served in Congress, she served as Secretary of State here in Michigan, that she feels that she hasn't really been able, she wants to do something that she can really
I don't think she was saying she
do.
hasn't done things like that. I mean, I think she's had a really
No, but taking a job at a much more micro,
Yeah.
local
But
level
that's
that
where
she feels that
she-
she can achieve more than achieving
Yeah.
in Congress.
Well, I mean, that's sort of more her background, frankly, than these other kind of jobs. Even as Secretary of State, was she clerk before that? I can't
I think
remember.
so,
County
yeah.
clerk.
I mean, it's the most dysfunctional body in America, for goodness sakes. And you look at some of the people who we elect to Congress, it is not exactly, these are people who a lot of them couldn't get jobs in middle management at a major company. I mean, this is not an impressive group. And you look at the public's approval level of them, and it reflects that. And they haven't got a whole heck of a lot done.
All
So
right.
I think she has. I mean, I actually think
No,
she's
she
been a
has, but she
good
wanted to
member of
come home.
Congress.
And she's been a
she wants to come home
proponent of the
and
Great
do-
Lakes, and
do
she's-
You
more
don't have
here.
to go down there and stay forever. I mean, and you do see more often on the Republican side, people get to that point 10, 15 years and they quit. I mean, on the Democratic side, you got guys like Conyers who barely functional and will never quit.
There's lots of Republican. There's lots of
There-
Republicans.
well, I
like
was
that,
going to
too.
say, you might want to throw out a couple
Well,
names.
you
How
look
long
at the
did Trent
experience-
Lott stay in
you look
the
at the
Senate? How long
experience in
did
Michigan.
Strom
Look at
Thurmond
the
last?
experience in
Come on.
Michigan, and you've got all of these guys who go from Congress to coffin, for crying out loud.
That's not a Democratic
That's a,
problem.
that's
That
a,
is
that's a
totally-
slogan I don't want to see on a
Okay.
T-shirt.
It's a generational
Sandy Levin is going to
issue.
limp into another term.
It's a generational issue, but all of those
I'm
all of
just
those
saying,
Democrats
you
you
compare the ages
mentioned,
of the Democratic delegation in the Michigan and the Republican
all of those
delegation,
Democrats
they
you
won't
mentioned,
let go.
but they all have Republican counterparts who have hung on just
Not
as
in this
long.
state.
Well, because they couldn't get elected.
All right, hey, Stephen, but I want to get your take on Brooks Patterson. The fact that he's
I mean, I think
running
Vicky
again?
Barnett's a good challenger for that seat. I worry that if you were going to beat Brooks Patterson, it would probably be with somebody who'd already won a countywide race. One of the prosecutor or the drain commissioner now is a Democrat. The treasurer, somebody like that. But I think she's
Brooks Patterson.
I think it'd be hard. I think it would be very hard. People think he does a really good job.
does a good job.
And they're, even if they vote Democratic, I mean, even if they vote Democratic for other races, they cross over and vote for him.
Yeah, this whole split ticket
for-
thing helps Brooks because the county is getting more and more Democratic, and this whole no straight ticket voting helps in races like this.
So, and then we heard this week that Senator Virgil Smith, he got sentenced to 10 months in jail, and he is going to be resigning.
He says he's good. He says he's going
He says he's going to resign at the end of the week. I found it very interesting, the whole change at the last minute of the plea deal, and that was part of the deal
don't
to
really like
resign.
that,
and
yeah.
I was a little confused by it, quite honestly.
Well, it is confusing. I mean, the judge is saying that you can't make resignation from office a condition of a plea. because that's not. I mean, it's
not the court's position to take away that seat. It's the
not
voters.
it's not the defendant's seat. His point is it's the voter's seat, and they voted that person into it, and so that person can't just be forced to resign it as part of a criminal justice process. The problem is that we've
seen
do this
that before,
all
right?
the time. I mean, politicians who plea bargain and say, well, as part of it, I'll step down.
Yeah.
So some court's going to have to say whether Talon is right. The
Kwame
judge.
wishes he'd done that, don't you?
Well, I think if
but
this stands for Virgil,
how
I mean, that
surpri-
really questions.
How surprised are we that state law allows you to serve in the Senate and serve a prison term at the same time? Why aren't either the Senate rules or state laws constructed to say if you get convicted of a felony, if you go to jail, you're out?
Well, I mean,
It should be simple.
I mean, there are rules for expulsion. That's all. They just kick people out.
Right.
Well,
Wow.
this should be an automatic. You check into a jail, you got to check out of your office at the legislature.
Well, check into a jail, but does it depend on the crime? What if someone was drunk driving and they check into jail for
I don't
I'm
care
sorry, we
what
have
it is.
15
If you
seconds
end
left.
up in jail, you should forfeit your seat.
All right.
should.
Well, he's expected to resign. We'll have to watch
see.
that. All right. Thanks, guys. And that's going to do it for MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you find us at MiWeek.org for any shows you might have missed. We're also on Twitter and on Facebook. Thanks for supporting Detroit Public TV. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next week for MiWeek. Take care.
Did you know? Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago. In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.